Welcome to the Deep Dive, and today we're kicking off a really important series aimed right at getting you ready for the CSWIP 3.1 Welding Inspector Exam.
That's right.
Our goal here, well, it's to go through some essential welding concepts using practice questions, the kind you might see on the exam, to give you that extra edge. We won't just look at answers, but the thinking behind them. Okay, let's unpack this.
Exactly. And, what's really fascinating here isn't just getting the right letter, A, B, C, or D. It's about understanding why, grasping those underlying principles. That's what builds real expertise as an inspector. And honestly, these details, they might seem small, but they have huge implications out there in the real world.
Couldn't agree more. It's like building that strong foundation.
Right.
Okay, let's jump right into our first question then. Here we go. Mag welding process. Which of the following would be a typical heat input value? And your options are A, 1.2 kJ LMM.
Okay.
B, 12 kJ LMM, C, 1.2 joulism, and D, 6.5 kJ LMM. This one gets right to a core concept. What are your thoughts? Why is heat input so critical here?
Right. So the correct answer, the one you're looking for, is a 1.2 kJ millimeter heat input. Well, it's basically the energy you're putting into the weld per unit length.
Okay.
And for mag welding, controlling this is absolutely vital. It directly affects the final metal structure, the metallurgy in the weld and the surrounding area, the HAZ.
Right, the heat affected zone.
Exactly. Around 1.2 kilojoules per millimeter is generally considered a good typical value. It gives you enough heat for good fusion, good penetration without overdoing it and causing problems like, say, excessive grain coarsening. That's where the metal's internal crystals get too big, which can make it less tough. So 1.2 kJRLM is kind of that sweet spot.
That makes sense. So if 1.2 is the sweet spot, what about those other options like 12 kJRLM? That sounds way off.
Oh, yeah, 12 kJRLM option B. That would generally be far too high for typical mag welding. You'd likely get major issues.
Like?
Well, definitely that grain coarsening we mentioned, which weakens the material, plus increased distortion of the part and potentially even hot cracking. Just too much heat.
Okay. And option C, 1.2 joules per millimeter.
See, that one's tricky in two ways. First, 1.2 joules is a tiny, tiny amount of energy in welding terms. Way too low for a proper weld. You'd probably get no fusion at all.
Right.
And second, while joulism and kilojoulism both measure heat input, the standard unit you'll almost always see in welding specs and calculations is kilojoules, kJ. So 1.2 millimeter is just not the right scale or unit you'd expect.
Got it. So it's about the right value and the right units.
Precisely. And connecting this to the bigger picture, controlling heat input isn't just about looks. It's fundamental engineering. It dictates the final strength, the toughness, the resistance to cracking down the line. Think of it like tempering steel. The heat treatment is invisible but critical. Same idea here.
A really good way to put it. Precision matters. Okay, So sticking with precision, let's look at setting up the equipment itself. Our next question is about calibration.
Right. Important step.
When calibrating a mechanized mag welding plant, which of the following applies? WFS equals wire feed speed. And the options A, check WFS current, volts and wire diameter beats C. Check WFS joint setup and gas flow rate, .C. Check gas flow rate, stick out length, WFS and current. Or D, all of the above. So what are we actually calibrating on the machine here?
Okay, for this one, the correct answer is C. Gas flow rate, stick out length, wire feed speed, and current.
Right.
When we talk about calibrating the plant, we mean making sure the machine is delivering exactly what the settings say it should be delivering. We're verifying the outputs.
Can you break down why those specific 4 and option C are the ones we calibrate?
Sure. Gas flow rate, you need to know the machine is delivering the correct amount of shielding gas. Too little means contamination, porosity. Too much can cause turbulence or just waste gas. That's machine setting you verify.
Makes sense.
Stick out length, the distance the wire protrudes from the contact tip. This affects electrical resistance, influencing voltage and penetration. While the operator sets it initially, verifying consistent control is part of ensuring the system works right.
Okay.
Wire feed speed, WFS, absolutely critical. It directly controls how much filler metal is added and is a primary factor in determining the current in most mag modes. You calibrate the feeder to ensure it's accurate. And finally, current. You need to verify that the current displayed or set is what's actually being delivered at the arc. It's key for heat input. So these 4 are measurable, controllable outputs of the welding plant itself.
So what about the things mentioned in the other options, like wire diameter or joint setup? Why aren't they part of the plant calibration?
Well, think about it. Wire diameter, option A, is crucial information, yes, but it's a property of the consumable you load into the machine. You don't calibrate the machine for wire diameter. You select parameters based on the diameter you're using.
Right. You check the spool.
Exactly. And joint setup, option B, things like root gap, bevel angle, that's vital preparation of the workpiece, not a calibration of the welding equipment. It's about getting the parts ready to be welded.
That's a really clear distinction. It's about verifying the machine's performance versus preparing the task.
Precisely. And getting that distinction right is important both for the exam and for practical inspection work. You need to know what you're responsible for checking on the machine versus the setup.
Absolutely. Okay, moving on. Our next question asks you to spot the odd one out, the incorrect statement. These can be a bit tricky.
Yeah, you have to know what's true to find the false one.
Exactly. Question 3. Which of the following statements is false? Options are A. In the MMA welding process, AC current produces the deepest penetration. B. DC electrode positive is used for the angle welding of steel plate. C. In the angle welding process, the wire feed speed remains constant during the welding operation. Or D, all of the above. Remember, find the false one.
Okay. The false statement here, which makes it the correct answer to the question, is A. In the MMA welding process, AC current produces the deepest penetration.
That's false.
That's generally false, yes. For MMA, or stick welding, it's typically DC electrode positive DCEP, sometimes called reverse polarity, that gives you deeper penetration compared to AC.
Ah, okay.
AC tends to give more of a medium penetration because the current is alternating back and forth. DCP focuses more heat at the workpiece, digging in deeper, especially with certain types of electrodes.
So if A is false, that means B and C must be true.
Correct. Statement B, DC electrode positive is used for mag welding of steel plate. Absolutely true. That's the standard setup for good penetration and arc stability on steel with mag.
Right.
And statement C, in mag welding, the wire feed speed remains constant. Yes, for conventional mechanized mag, the WFS is typically set and held constant to maintain a stable arc and consistent deposition. So what's fascinating here is really knowing those fundamental differences in how current types behave across different processes. MMA, mag, TIG, they all have their own nuances with polarity and current type.
Definitely something to lock in. All right, question 4 takes us into material behavior, specifically brittle fractures, a really critical area for inspectors.
Very critical.
Brittle fractures, the susceptibility in steels will increase with, and the options, A, the formation of a fine grain structure, B, a reduction in the in-service temperature to sub-zero conditions, C, a slow cooling rate, or D, all of the above. What makes steel more likely to fracture in a brittle way?
The key factor here is B, a reduction in the in-service temperature to sub-zero condition.
Temperature again?
Absolutely. Many steels, especially common structural steels, go through what's called a ductile to brittle transition. As they get colder, particularly below freezing, they lose their ability to deform plastically. Their toughness drops significantly.
So they just snap.
Essentially, yes. Instead of stretching or bending, they can fracture suddenly, often catastrophically, with little warning. That's why material selection for cold environments is so incredibly important.
Okay, so low temperature is bad for toughness. What about option A, fine grain structure?
Ah, that's actually the opposite. A fine grain structure generally improves toughness and reduces the susceptibility to brittle fracture.
Really? How does that work?
Well, think of the grain boundaries as little roadblocks. The more boundaries you have, which you get with finer grains, the harder it is for a crack to travel easily through the material. So fine grains are usually a good thing for toughness.
Interesting. And option C, slow cooling rate.
Slow cooling affects the microstructure, certainly. It might lead to coarser grains, which, as we just said, could reduce toughness compared to faster cooling that might produce finer grains. But the direct dramatic impact of dropping the temperature below that critical transition point, that's far more significant in increasing brittle fracture risk than just the cooling rate itself in most cases.
Got it. So temperature is the primary driver there.
For increasing susceptibility, yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, understanding this transition temperature is vital for designing bridges, ships, pipelines, anything that might operate in the cold. It prevents selecting a material that might be perfectly fine at room temperature but could fail disastrously at minus 20 degrees.
A sobering thought. Okay, one last question for this session, focusing on weld geometry and how it affects long-term performance, specifically against fatigue.
Right, fatigue is all about repeated stress.
Which of the following fillet welded T-joints would have the highest resistance to fatigue fractures, assuming material, welding process, filler material to be the same? Options. A A convex fillet weld throat thickness, 10 millimeter, B. A miter fillet weld throat thickness, 8 millimeter, C. A concave fillet weld throat thickness, 8 millimeter, or D. Both A and B, assuming throat thicknesses were the same. So the shape of the weld matters here. How?
It matters hugely for fatigue. The answer with the highest resistance is C, a concave fillet weld throat thickness 8 millimeter.
Concave, okay. Why is that better?
Because of stress concentration. Fatigue cracks almost always start at points where stress is concentrated. And in a fillet weld, that's typically right at the weld toe where the weld meets the base plate. A concave profile provides a smooth, gradual transition between the weld and the plate. This smooth curve distributes the stress much more evenly, reducing the peak stress right at the toe.
Compared to the other shapes.
Exactly. A convex weld, option A, bulges outward, creating a sharper angle at the toe. A miter weld, option B, is flat-faced, also resulting in a relatively sharp transition. These sharper angles act like stress razors.
Like little magnets for cracks.
That's a good way to think about it. Even though option A has a bigger throat thickness, 10 millimeter versus 8 millimeter, its less favorable convex profile means it would likely perform worse under fatigue conditions than the smoother 8 millimeter concave weld in option C. For fatigue, the smoothness of the profile at the toe is often more critical than just the bulk size of the weld.
So it's not just about putting enough metal down, it's about shaping it correctly.
Precisely. This really raises that important point about how subtle geometric features can drastically affect long-term reliability. A weld might look strong past static tests, but if that profile isn't right, under repeated loading, it's just waiting to fail. As an inspector, assessing that profile is crucial.
Wow, okay. That covers a lot of really important ground. We went from heat input and calibration basics through understanding current types, brittle fracture risks, and now the geometry of fatigue resistance.
Yeah, quite a range.
So when you're prepping for the CSWIP 3.1 exam, it really drives home that you're not just memorizing facts, you're learning the reasons behind the rules. What does this all mean for someone aiming for that certification?
It means that true competence, not just for the exam, but for being a good inspector, comes from understanding these fundamentals. These aren't just test questions. They're the principles that ensure safety and quality in the real world. And, just consider this for a moment. These choices, the right heat input, the correct calibration, the proper weld profile, they seem like small details on a procedure sheet, right? But making the wrong choice or failing to spot it during inspection can literally be the difference between a structure lasting safely for its design life or failing prematurely, sometimes with tragic consequences. Your role as an inspector is to be that crucial link, ensuring those right choices are made and verified.
That really puts the responsibility and the importance of the role into perspective. A powerful thought to end on. All right, well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. A huge thank you for joining us as we work through these CSWIP 3.1 prep questions. Keep practicing, keep reviewing, and really focus on understanding that why.
Absolutely. Keep digging deeper.
Catch you on the next deep dive.